She walked into that bank with everything she had earned. 3 years of sacrifice, 3 years of early mornings, late nights, and a little girl watching her mother build something real from nothing. She had the documents. She had the numbers. She had the check. She had done everything right. And he tore it apart. Slowly, deliberately. The way men tear things when they want you to understand that your effort means nothing to them. Chad Whitmore, blonde, blue-eyed, sitting behind his mahogany desk like he had been born on top of it, looked at this black woman, this beautiful, hard-working black mother who had spent 3 years earning every single dollar in that check. And he tore it in half, then again, and again, and left the pieces on the edge of his desk like trash. He never looked at her daughter, but her daughter looked at him. 5 years old, holding her teddy bear, watching a man destroy her mother's dream in 4 seconds, and asking in the softest, most devastating voice you have ever heard, "Mommy, why did he tear the paper?" What Chad Whitmore did not know, what he could not have imagined in his worst nightmare, was that on the other side of the frosted glass wall, a man in a black blazer was watching everything. Still, silent. A dragon tattooed up his neck, eyes that missed nothing. The Korean Mafia boss had seen enough, and what happened next changed everything Chad Whitmore thought he owned. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click join to become a member and help our channel. The bank smelled like cold money and old marble, the kind of place that was designed deliberately to make certain people feel like they didn't belong. Brianna Calloway walked through the glass doors of Whitmore Capital Bank on a Tuesday morning in October, holding her daughter's hand with her left hand and her wine-colored leather bag with her right. The bag had a gold handle. She had bought it 3 years ago, on the day she decided she was going to build something real, something that couldn't be taken from her. She had carried it to every important meeting since. It was her quiet armor. Maya, 5 years old, looked up at the crystal chandeliers with her mouth open. Her brown teddy bear, Mr. Biscuit, worn at the ears from years of being loved too hard, pressed against her chest. "Mommy," she whispered, "is this a castle?" Brianna crouched to her daughter's eye level, adjusted one of Maya's curls, and smiled the kind of smile that costs everything to hold together. "Almost, baby. You stay close to me, okay?" She had done everything right. 3 years of meticulous savings, documented income, a business plan that a former professor of hers had called one of the cleanest projections he had seen from an independent contractor. She wasn't asking for charity. She wasn't asking for a favor. She was presenting a transaction, a legitimate financing request to expand her accounting office, the one she had built client by client, small Black-owned business by small Black-owned business, in a neighborhood that the banking system had historically treated as invisible. The paperwork was in order. The numbers were correct. The check was real. The junior manager who greeted her at the entrance smiled the way people smile when they have already decided something before you open your mouth. He escorted her, not to a standard teller window, but, as a gesture that was meant to feel like elevation, to the office of Chad Whitmore himself. The executive director of the bank happened to be on site that morning for a series of meetings with high-value clients. The manager later said he thought it would speed up the process. He had no way of knowing what he had actually done. Chad Whitmore was 58 seconds into looking at Brianna's documents when he made his decision. She could see it. the exact moment the calculation completed behind his blue eyes. He picked up the check. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at Maya, who was sitting very still in the leather chair beside her mother, holding Mr. Biscuit and watching everything. Then he tore the check in half. Slowly. The way people do things slowly when they want you to understand that they are not afraid of you. He tore it again, and placed the pieces on the edge of the mahogany desk like they were a receipt he no longer needed. This type of financing isn't compatible with the bank's client profile, sweetheart. I'd suggest trying somewhere else. The room did not shake. No one gasped. The chandeliers continued to catch the morning light without interruption. The marble floor did not crack. Brianna looked at the torn pieces of the check scattered across the edge of his desk. She looked at them the way you look at something that used to be 3 years of your life. She did not cry. She would not give him that. She breathed once, slowly, through her nose, the way she had taught herself to do in every room that tried to make her small. Maya tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy?" The girl's voice was soft and confused. "Why did he tear the paper?" Brianna did not answer. She picked up her wine-colored bag, took her daughter's hand, and turned toward the door. What she did not see, what no one in that office saw, was the man sitting in the VIP waiting lounge on the other side of the frosted glass wall. He was dressed entirely in black. He had not moved during the entire exchange. He had a dragon tattooed up the right side of his neck, and he had seen everything. Jang Hyun-Woo had not survived 45 years, 20 of them operating in the shadow economy of the eastern seaboard, by being the kind of man who reacted. Reaction was for people who were afraid. He had learned, very early, that the most dangerous thing a man could do was move slowly and deliberately, while everyone around him assumed he was doing nothing at all. He watched Brianna walk out of Chad Whitmore's office with her daughter's hand in hers, and he did not move from his chair. But something moved inside him. He had seen that walk before. Not from Brianna specifically. He had never seen her in his life. But he recognized the architecture of it. The squared shoulders, the lifted chin, the deliberate pace of someone who was holding themselves together through sheer refusal to collapse in front of the wrong person. He had seen that walk on his daughter once, when she was 4 years old and had fallen off her bicycle in front of a group of older children, and decided, with a ferocity that had stunned him, that she would not cry until she was inside the house. She had made it to the front door before her knees gave. He looked away from the glass. He looked at his hands for a moment. Then he turned to the younger man seated to his left, his assistant, a quiet 26-year-old named Park, who had learned to read Jang's silences the way sailors read weather. "Find out who she is," Jang said. Park did not ask which woman. He had been watching the same glass wall. Inside Chad Whitmore's office, Chad was already on the phone, laughing about something that had nothing to do with what had just happened. The torn check sat at the edge of his desk for another 40 minutes before his assistant swept it into the trash, along with the coffee cups and the crumpled napkins from his morning meeting. It took less than 3 seconds to disappear. Chad Whitmore had already forgotten Brianna Calloway by the time he sat down for lunch. This was, as it turned out, the most catastrophic mistake of his life. By that evening, Park had assembled a complete profile. Brianna Calloway, 32, independent accounting contractor, single mother, 2 years of documented income growth, a business plan with clean projections, a credit history with no defaults. The financing request was not only legitimate, it was, by any standard metric, low risk. There was no reasonable professional justification for the denial. Jang read the file in his car, parked outside a restaurant he owned on 32nd Street. He read it once, then set it down on the seat beside him, Then Park placed a second file on top of it. This one was about Chad Whitmore. Jang had not asked for it. Park had pulled it because in the course of tracing Brianna's documents back through the bank's internal network, through channels that were not entirely legal and entirely untraceable, he had found something that seemed relevant. He had flagged it without comment and let Jang decide. Whitmore Capital Bank was, on paper, a mid-sized private institution with a clean regulatory record. Underneath the paper, it was something considerably different. There were shell accounts. There were clients who did not exist. There were tax structures so aggressively engineered that they had crossed, in at least 3 documented instances, from aggressive into fraudulent. And there was a debt. $4,200,000 owed through a series of holding companies to a logistics and importation group that had been quietly absorbed 14 months ago into the broader financial infrastructure that Jang controlled. Chad Whitmore owed money to Jang Hyun-Woo. Chad Whitmore did not know this. The acquisition had been structured specifically to obscure that kind of visibility. Most creditors never knew who they were ultimately indebted to until it was time for someone to come collect. Jang sat with this information for a long moment. Outside the car window, the city continued its indifferent noise. Taxis, voices, the subway exhaling from somewhere underground. He thought about Maya pressing Mr. Biscuit against her chest and asking, in a voice that had no idea what it was witnessing, why the man had torn the paper. He thought about Chad Whitmore already having forgotten she existed. Then he picked up his phone and called his attorney. "Schedule a meeting with Whitmore," he said. "In person. My office. Tell him it's about a debt restructuring." He paused. "Tell him to come alone." Chad Whitmore arrived at Jang's office on a Thursday afternoon, believing, with the complete confidence of a man who had never genuinely lost anything, that he was walking into a negotiation. The building was in Midtown, unremarkable from the outside, the kind of glass and steel structure that blended into the Manhattan skyline without announcing itself. The lobby was clean and minimal, no artwork on the walls, no music. The receptionist did not smile when he checked in. She simply said, "Mr. Jang is expecting you," and gestured toward the elevator without looking up from her desk. Chad adjusted his Rolex in the reflection of the elevator doors and told himself this was routine. The office on the 14th floor was almost aggressively quiet. No clutter, no trophies on the shelves. A single desk, dark wood, almost entirely empty. One window facing north. And behind the desk, Jang Hyun-Woo, dressed in black, hands flat on the surface in front of him, watching Chad walk through the door with an expression that did not shift by a single degree. Chad extended his hand. "Mr. Jang, Chad Whitmore. Pleasure to finally sit down." The instruction was not loud. It was not aggressive. It was delivered in the tone of a man who had never in his adult life needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. Chad sat down. For a moment, Jang said nothing. He looked at Chad with those flat, dark eyes, and Chad, who had stared down regulatory auditors and angry investors and 2 ex-wives, felt something move through him that he could not immediately name. It lived somewhere between discomfort and the early edges of fear, and he did not like it. Then Jang placed an envelope on the desk and slid it forward. Chad opened it. Inside were photographs. Sharp, clear, time-stamped. They showed the interior of his office at Whitmore Capital. They showed Brianna Calloway seated across from his desk, her documents spread before her, Maya beside her, clutching the teddy bear. They showed Chad's hands holding the check. They showed the exact moment he tore it. And they showed Maya's face, not with dramatic distortion, not manipulated in any way, simply as it was, A 5-year-old girl watching something happen that she did not understand, but could feel was wrong. Behind the photographs was the second document, the financial report, shell accounts, ghost clients, the 3 instances of documented fraud, and at the back, a single page summarizing the debt, $4,200,000, traced through its full chain of holding companies to its final destination. Jang watched Chad's face move through the photographs and then through the financial summary. He watched the exact sequence: confusion, recognition, calculation, and then, finally, the arrival of something that Chad Whitmore had not experienced in a very long time: understanding of his own position. "You tore that woman's check," Jang said, in front of her 5-year-old daughter. Chad set the papers down carefully. He was already restructuring internally, already running scenarios, already preparing the version of himself that negotiated. "Mr. Jang, I understand how this might appear, but lending decisions are made on the basis of—" "I'm not asking you to explain the decision," Jang said. "I'm not interested in the explanation." Silence. "You owe me $4 million, Jang continued. "I could file the collection notice tomorrow morning. By Friday afternoon, your board would know the full debt structure, and the fraud documentation would be on its way to the U.S. Attorney's Office. You would lose the bank, your licenses, and depending on how the investigation develops, considerably more than that." Chad's jaw tightened. "That sounds like a threat." "It's arithmetic," Jang said. "What I'm offering you is a different calculation." He leaned forward slightly, the first movement he had made since Chad entered the room. "You will call Brianna Calloway tomorrow morning and tell her there was an error in the evaluation process. You will approve her financing, full amount, preferential rate, and you will deliver the contract to her personally, in the branch, with your staff present." Chad stared at him. "You want me to, in front of her daughter?" Jang added quietly. "If the child is there." The room held its silence for a long moment. Outside the window, 14 floors below, the city moved without awareness of any of this. The taxis, the pedestrians, the ordinary machinery of a Thursday afternoon. Chad Whitmore looked at the photograph of Maya's face one more time. Then he said, with a voice that had lost every trace of the man who had eaten lunch and forgotten a woman's name 20 minutes after destroying 3 years of her work, "And if I do this, the debt, the documents, will be handled," Jang said. "You have until tomorrow at noon." He said nothing else. He did not need to. He simply looked at Chad with those still, dark eyes until Chad stood up, picked up his jacket, and walked back to the elevator that had brought him up believing this was routine. The doors closed. Jang did not move for a moment. Then he turned his chair toward the window and looked out at the city in silence. Brianna almost didn't go back. She had spent 2 nights convincing herself that whatever the bank wanted, whatever correction or review or follow-up call they claimed to need, was not worth the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from walking back into a place that has already told you exactly what it thinks of you. She had sat at her kitchen table on Wednesday evening with Maya asleep in the next room, Mr. Biscuit tucked under the girl's arm, and she had looked at the contract folders she had prepared with such careful precision and thought about what it would cost her, emotionally, to carry them back through those glass doors. Then she thought about Maya asking, in that soft and devastating voice, why the man had torn the paper. She went back. She wore the moss-green blazer. She carried the wine-colored bag. She did not rehearse what she would say, because she had decided that if this was another exercise in humiliation, she would not give it the dignity of preparation. She held Maya's hand, and she walked through the doors of Whitmore Capital Bank on a Friday morning. and she held her chin at the exact angle that said, without words, that she had not come here to be made small. The branch was quiet. A few customers at the teller windows, soft instrumental music that no one was listening to. And standing in the open floor near the center of the room, not behind his desk, not insulated by mahogany and distance and the architecture of authority, was Chad Whitmore. He looked different. It took Brianna a moment to identify why, and then she understood. He looked like a man who had spent the last 48 hours inside a version of himself he did not recognize. The Rolex was still there, the suit was still pressed, but something behind the blue eyes had shifted, quietly and irrevocably. And whatever it was that had allowed him to tear that check with slow, deliberate pleasure on Tuesday morning was no longer entirely present. He walked toward her. Two of his staff members stood nearby, aware that something was happening that was not a standard transaction. He stopped in front of her. He held an envelope with both hands, a gesture that was not natural to him, that clearly required something from him to perform, and that he performed anyway. "Ms. Calloway," he said, "there was an error in our evaluation process. Your financing has been approved. Full amount, preferential rate. The contract is in here, along with the replacement check." Brianna did not reach for it immediately. She looked at him for a moment, not with triumph, not with the satisfaction of someone watching an enemy collapse, but with the steady, level gaze of a woman who had always known her own worth and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. She took the envelope. She opened it. She reviewed the documents with the careful attention of someone who had built a career out of knowing exactly what numbers meant and where the traps were hidden. Everything was in order. The rate was legitimate. The approval was clean. She closed the envelope. Maya, who had been standing beside her mother with Mr. Biscuit under one arm and her free hand holding the edge of Brianna's blazer, looked up at Chad Whitmore with the uncomplicated directness that belongs only to children. "Mommy, is he going to pay for the paper he tore?" The branch went very still. The teller nearest to them looked at the counter. Chad Whitmore opened his mouth and then closed it again. There was no answer available to him, not one that was honest, not one that was sufficient, not one that a 5-year-old girl with a teddy bear and a hair ribbon and complete moral clarity would accept as adequate. He said nothing. Brianna looked at her daughter, and something in her face, the controlled composure she had carried since Tuesday morning like a second skeleton holding her upright, softened, just slightly, just enough. She crouched to Maya's level, the way she had at the entrance 3 days ago, and she said quietly, "He's working on it, baby." Then she stood, took Maya's hand, and walked out of Whitmore Capital Bank for the last time. Across the street, in the back seat of a black car with tinted windows, Jang Hyun-Woo watched her come through the glass doors. He watched her pause on the sidewalk for a moment, adjust the strap of the wine-colored bag on her shoulder, and look up at the sky with an expression he could not fully read from this distance, but recognized in the structure of it. The look of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just, quietly, been allowed to set it down. Maya said something. Brianna laughed. It was brief and real, and it reached him even through the glass. Park glanced in the rearview mirror. "We good?" Jang watched until Brianna and Maya turned the corner and disappeared from view. "We're good," he said. 3 weeks later, an anonymous package arrived at the office of the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. It contained financial documentation, shell accounts, ghost clients, 3 instances of tax fraud, a complete debt structure relating to Whitmore Capital Bank and its executive director, Chad Whitmore. The investigation that followed lasted 11 months. Chad lost his position in the first week, his operating licenses in the third, and any remaining claim to the life he had built on the assumption that certain people simply did not matter. On the morning that the news broke, Brianna Calloway was at her new office, larger, cleaner, with a window that caught the light, helping a client reconcile his books for the quarter. Maya was at school. On the window beside Brianna's desk was a drawing, taped carefully at the corners. A large yellow sun above a small building, and underneath it, in uneven 5-year-old handwriting, 2 words: Mommies. She did not know who had sent the documents. She would never know. But she understood, in the way that people sometimes understand things they cannot explain, that the world has its own architecture of consequence, quiet, patient, and far more precise than any of us, when we are busy tearing things apart, ever think to account for. Outside, the city moved. The taxis and the voices and the subway exhaling from underground. Ordinary. Indifferent. And somewhere in it, a man in a black blazer with a dragon on his neck was already looking at something else entirely. Already still. Already watching. Already waiting for the next moment when the room would need to be reminded of what it had forgotten. He never looked for credit. He never needed to. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever worked hard for something, poured everything you had into a dream, only to have someone look at your effort and decide, in an instant, that you simply didn't belong at the table? Have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, or humiliated by someone who believed their position gave them the right to make you feel small, and had to hold yourself together in that moment for the sake of someone you love? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and karma, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.